So my role in the project was to provide legal research support. And what this involved was, after we'd identified the common activities that were taking place in pedestrianized zones, we had to identify what the applicable legislation was, and also to locate relevant case law. Now, unfortunately, in this particular instance, there wasn't a lot of case law, because a lot of the offenses we're talking about today are minor offenses. They're usually tried in magistrate's court, and as a result, the judgments are usually unreported. So there wasn't very much case law for us to go on. So what happened was, the research was then driven by statutory interpretation, and it was contextualized by all of the anecdotal evidence that Corinne had gathered. So, out of this legal research, there were two recurring themes. The first was that historical laws actually indicated that the types of behavior that could hinder pedestrianization are already thought of as sufficiently antisocial as to be criminalized. What do I mean by that? A good example of this is Section 4, subsection 5 of the Summary Offences Ordinance. It is an offence to cause an annoyance or obstruction in any public place by exposing anything for sale in or upon any street, road, or footway. However, these laws have not been revised to capture all of the current hindrances to pedestrianization. So, for example, it won't capture commercial promotion because, as Corinne mentioned, that does not involve an actual sale. So if it's an indirect sale, this statutory offence does not apply. The second recurring theme that emerged from the legal research was the fact that there are massive vacuums of regulation. Again, commercial promotion is a good example of this. What I want to do now is just to highlight three areas that could potentially significantly impact pedestrianization, but there is a complete absence of regulation. So, the first is street performance, which causes a number of problems. There is a difficulty with distinguishing, for example, begging, which is an offence under Section 26A of the Summary Offences Ordinance, and busking, which is not an offence. Now, although there is a requirement for police permission to play musical instruments in a public place under Section 4, subsection 15 of the Summary Offences Ordinance, that requirement is not enforced regularly, and there is an argument that it's actually disproportionately bureaucratic for the simple act of busking. The difficulties arise, as Corinne has mentioned, with noise control. Noise control managed or regulated by the Environmental Protection Department under Section 5 of the Noise Control Ordinance. However, in practice, it's extremely difficult to enforce if there is more than one source of noise in the pedestrianized area. So Montauk has been highlighted as a case study in the report as being a particularly problematic example where the regulation or lack thereof has failed them. The second area I wanted to bring your attention to, commercial promotion, we've talked about a number of times. There are a number of offences that we thought under the Summary Offences Ordinance could be applicable, but they still all hinge upon selling things. So as long as there is no actual sale, if it's an indirect sale, those offences all don't apply. We felt that there was a possibility that you could regulate them indirectly by way of regulating their advertising material. Now, this is regulated by the FEHD under the Public Health and Municipal Services Ordinance. They could be committing offences for displaying bills or posters without permission or occupying land to do the same. But the problem, as Corinne has pointed out, is that if the displays are movable, then they can get around these offences quite easily. Now, this absence of regulation of commercial promoters can be contrasted with the very strict scheme that is in place for hawkers. And this is another example, I felt, of a legal anachronism tackling historical activities that has not evolved to address the current issues that we're facing. The third area that I wanted to mention is the shopfront extensions and outdoor restaurant seating. Now, these two areas actually highlight the inconsistencies of regulation. As Corinne mentioned, there is a system in place for restaurants to obtain permission for outdoor extension, but there are none for shops. Instead, the Home Affairs Department has what appears to be an ad hoc process to designate what they call tolerated areas versus black spots. Now, this appearance of inconsistency is compounded by the exceptionally low fees for restaurants occupying government land. That fee schedule is located in the Land Miscellaneous Provisions Regulations and has not been updated since 1976. So they don't reflect current property values. And you can contrast this with the recent fixed penalty fine of $1,500 that was imposed for shopfront extensions under Section 4A of the Summary Offences Ordinance. Now, as you can tell from the presentation today, there are a lot of different activities going on in pedestrianised areas. And there is a wide variety of sometimes overlapping laws and enforcement, or a lack thereof. What we try to do with the report is to break down each of these areas and to make them easy to understand. So what you'll find in the report itself, if you go to the report, each section, sorry, can everybody see? Each section actually begins with a nice little diagram that sets out all of the applicable laws. Okay? And then what happens is if you continue on with the text, it actually goes on to discuss the applicable laws in detail, and then it discusses the problems with enforcement. You will also see within the text that there are case studies that are district specific. And then finally, for each section, what you will also have is a diagram at the end. Oops, where's my diagram? Oh, there it is. So there's a diagram at the end that actually helps to highlight what the issues with the laws currently are. I wanted to conclude by saying that I highlighted these three areas because although they seem to have the highest impact on walkability in Hong Kong, they're only marginally addressed, but should not be difficult to legislate for. So for example, with regard to the amplifiers, as Karina mentioned, these should simply be included, along with musical instruments, in the Summary Offences Ordinance, so that the police can address their use and control noise levels in public spaces. We could include commercial promotion or touting under the Summary Offences Ordinance, or perhaps more effectively, we could simply extend the hawker controls to commercial promoters. And finally, we should standardize the process and charges for extending shops and restaurants into the streets. Now, in reading this report, we may be tempted to come to the conclusion that it would be preferable to have a unified regulation of pedestrianised areas instead of the current patchwork of regulation. The starting point needs to be an examination of the effectiveness of current enforcement before an overhaul of the laws needs to be considered. Thank you very much for listening to us today. So I'll now hand you over to Joyce for our Q&A session.